Welcome to this webinar. My name is Brett Hall and I'm the Chair of Farmers for Climate Action. Farmers for Climate Action acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we work, the land our guests and speakers are joining us from, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Just a brief introduction about today's webinar. Thank you everyone for attending. It's hugely exciting. Farmers for Climate Action and Ability Agriculture, we're joining today to bring you this conversation with one of the world's true pioneers in animal husbandry, Dr Temple Grandin, Distinguished Professor of Animal Science at Colorado State University, USA. We will be recording this webinar and it'll be available for you to see later on. We'll be using Zoom webinar mode, so we won't be actually able to see you. Please put your comments in the chat and questions in the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen. We've actually received hundreds of questions for Temple in the lead up to this webinar. It's been incredible to see how much of an impact she has made in handling livestock worldwide. We'll try to get as many questions as possible, but we apologise in advance if we're not able to get to yours. But there are many very similar questions, so your issues that you've put up and questions you've put through should be addressed. First, a little bit about Farmers for Climate Action. We're a movement of over 8,400 farmers backed by over 80,000 community supporters. We're fighting for strong economy-wide climate action. We believe the opportunities for farmers and regional communities that can come from climate action, and that by growing the number of farmers, regional Australians and policymakers who are advocating for climate action, we can realise those opportunities right across the country and secure regional Australia's sustainability for generations to come. We're proudly independent, non-for-profit and non-partisan, and I'm honoured to lead the organisation as chair. A little bit about the agenda. Soon I'll hand over to Nigel Corish, who is the chair of the Ability Agriculture Foundation. He has a mixed cropping farm and runs cattle near Goondiwindi in Queensland. Nigel will talk about the important role of ability agriculture before introducing our fabulous guest speaker, Temple Grandin. Temple will talk for about 15-20 minutes about her life, improving animal welfare, as well as some emerging issues she's seen across agriculture. We'll then move into a discussion between Nigel and Temple, and that discussion will ask some of your questions. We're grateful, so grateful for Temple for giving her time up today to come and talk to us in the evening over there in Colorado. I can't wait for the conversation. Over to you, please, Nigel.
Thanks, Brett, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's an actual honour and privilege to be chair of the Ability Agriculture Foundation. I'm especially delighted to co-host this webinar alongside Farmers for Climate Action. As someone who has farmed my entire life with cerebral palsy, I've experienced firsthand the challenges and opportunities of working in agriculture with a disability. These experiences are part of what drives my passion for the Ability Agriculture Foundation, where our mission is to ensure that people with disabilities and neurodiversity are not only represented, but supported and empowered to thrive in agriculture. The Ability Agriculture Foundation was established in 2023 with a clear purpose: to break down the barriers and create opportunities for people with disabilities in agriculture. With an online community of around 2,300 people, this work is deeply personal for many of us. For me, it's about building a future where disability is not a limitation, but part of the strength and diversity that drives innovation in our industry. With 80% of our board identifying as individuals with disability or family members of those with lived experiences, we are uniquely positioned to understand the challenges faced by our community. Together, we're working to build a more inclusive agricultural industry that benefits everyone. Over the past year, the Foundation has taken great strides to advance inclusion in agriculture. One initiative I'm particularly proud of is the Ability Entrepreneurs Program, where we support individuals with disabilities to develop innovative agricultural projects, providing mentorship and resources to help bring their ideas to life. At the Ability Agriculture Foundation, we believe that diversity is a strength. We create an industry where everyone has the opportunity to contribute, we unlock incredible potential for innovation, resilience, and sustainability. It is my pleasure and excitement to introduce Professor Dr. Temple Grandin to everyone. Dr. Temple Grandin is a globally recognised expert in livestock handling and animal welfare. Her innovative designs, including curved chute systems and a centre track restrainer, are used worldwide, with nearly half of all cattle in North America handled through systems she's created. These designs have transformed the industry by reducing stress on animals and improving efficiency. As a passionate advocate for animal welfare, Dr. Grandin developed an objective scoring system for assessing livestock handling, now widely adopted by major corporations. Her research has improved practices in areas such as cattle temperament, humane stunning methods, and reducing stress in meat plants. Dr. Grandin holds a PhD in animal science and is a professor at the Colorado State University, where she teaches and consults on livestock behaviour and facility design. Beyond academia, she has been featured on programs like 60 Minutes, The Larry King Live, and publications like Time Magazine and the New York Times. Her TED Talk, The World Needs All Kinds of Minds, advocates for neurodiversity and has inspired millions. She is also a celebrated author with bestsellers like Thinking in Pictures and Visual Thinking. Her life story was captured in an Emmy-winning HBO movie, Temple Grandin, showcasing her groundbreaking achievements as an individual with autism. Dr. Grandin continues to transform the livestock industry, improve animal welfare, and advocate for the strengths of neurodiverse individuals. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, it's really good to be here today. Tell a little bit about my history. I was a severely autistic kid, no speech till age 4. I want to thank all the teachers that worked with me. I had a great science teacher. I had my aunt out at the ranch. The other thing is, you got to expose students to interesting things to get them interested in interesting things. I originally did not come from an agricultural background, but I got exposed to the cattle industry in the Western United States when I was a teenager. And we need to get a lot more young people out doing things with livestock. And I've done a lot of work on cattle handling facilities, stuff I've worked on. I've now been in the industry for 50 years. And I'm happy to say that cattle handling has greatly improved. It has really, really improved. And I think that's just fantastic that the industry's improved. But I've got some new concerns. And one of my concerns is people are saying cattle are terrible, they wreck the environment with methane and everything else. And what people don't realize is that 20% of the world's land can only be grazed. You can't use that land for anything with crops. There's not enough water. And if you graze land properly and you rotate pasture properly, you're going to end up improving the land. In fact, I recently wrote a paper on grazing cattle, sheep, and goats is an important part of a sustainable agricultural future. We got to do grazing right, and we can actually improve land. In fact, there's some interesting statistics on methane generation. Back before Europeans came to North America, the herds of bison put about 85% of the same amount of methane out. Another thing we can be doing is grazing livestock, also sheep, on cover crops, and use these animals to actually improve the land. So what I did in that paper was get a whole bunch of literature together to show that if we use ruminant animals right, we can actually improve land. Another thing I've worked on, and I'm kind of dismayed about this, is we're getting handling really good. But just in the last 5 years, we've been getting increasing problems with lameness and congestive heart failure in young fed beef cattle. This is problems with lameness and congestive heart failure increasing in young fed steers and heifers. And both of those papers are open access, free downloads. And some of this is due to breeding. We're breeding for heavier at a younger age. And we're ending up with things like crooked feet, leg problems. A survey that was done 2 years ago by my colleague Lily Edwards showed that 8% of the fat beef were lame, and this is genetic. This is problems with feet and legs. That's not okay. And the problem with these kinds of problems is they kind of creep up on you slowly. Also, problems with congestive heart failure have gotten worse. There's some cases where 20% of the cattle have got a swollen heart. That's not okay. And we need to be measuring that. You can go online and type cattle congestive heart failure into Google, and you can find scorecards, swollen hearts. And it's related back to overselection for meat traits. And this problem used to just happen at high altitudes. Well, it's now happening at much, much lower altitudes. And some feedlot managers have actually traced it back to certain Angus bulls. And I think some of this is somewhat regional. You can get in some parts of the world where it's just not a problem, but I'd be careful on what semen you're importing. Make sure it's from the bulls that don't have this problem. And I first started seeing it showing up, about 10 years ago. Now it's gotten to where it's come to a head. 2 brand new surveys just came out that are not in my paper. And the 20% of the cattle, around 20%, had swollen hearts in Kansas and Texas. That is not okay. This is what I call bad becoming normal. It's going to be hard to handle cattle that are weak and don't want to walk. Now, another thing that's helped me in a lot of my work is I'm an extreme visual thinker. And I discuss this in my new book, Visual Thinking, Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions. And a visual thinker can see when something is going to go wrong. We need our visual thinkers. Visual thinkers are really good with animals. They're also really good with mechanical things. They can see how mechanical things worked. And when I was out in the plants during the 90s and the 80s, working on the center track restrainer and other equipment, I worked with people who had big, gigantic steel shops, and they were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. We need these kids that think differently. And the people I worked with are retired, and they are not getting replaced. Also, us visual thinkers were not too good in higher math. Now, there's another kind of autism where they're super good at higher math. You can get autism that's super good at visual thinking, others that are super good at math. And we need these minds. We really, really, really need them. Now, what I said I would do is just do a really short presentation. I don't think I need to go through all the cattle handling. I have lots of information on my website, grandin.com, showing you how to design handling facilities. And I want to emphasize to students that are out there that might be listening, you want to make change right about the stuff you do. You're doing something really great with grazing. We've got some people doing some fantastic stuff with grazing and nobody knows about it. Write about some of the stuff you're doing. I used to write a lot of just how-to articles. Now, I think what we'll do is you'll just go into the questions. One of the problems I've got is I think there's some formatting difference between the Zoom here and the Zoom in Australia. You may have to read the questions to me.
Yep, no, absolutely. Temple, thank you very much for your introduction. More than happy to lead into a discussion for around 10 minutes and then move back to Brett to ask some more questions around.
Well, you said you had 200 questions.
Yep. No, we've got plenty to choose from. Thank you very much.
People are interested in building cattle handling facilities. I have my book, Humane Livestock Handling. Also, the new edition, 6th edition of Livestock Handling and Transport has just been published. That just came out with all the latest stuff on animal handling and got many guest authors, updated everything in it on animal handling. That's it's available on Amazon now. It's also available from Cabby over in the UK.
Excellent. Temple, for my first question, you mentioned in your introduction that you were first introduced to cattle in your teenage years. What was the first connection with cattle like for you?
Well, I went to special boarding school for kids that, that were different, you might say. We had a small dairy, and I learned to milk cows there. And then a couple of years later, I went out to my aunt's ranch in Arizona, got introduced to beef cattle, Western United States. So all of my cattle experiences started as a teenager. so you never know where you might get interested in things. But if students don't get exposed to interesting stuff, they're not going to get interested in it. They've got to get exposed to stuff. That's just so important.
Yeah. And now my next question was going to be around students. What advice would you give students and people with neurodivergency to be confident to succeed and thrive in a career in agriculture?
Well, they've got to get out and do it, is the first thing. The other thing is I'm seeing too many smart, fully verbal autistic kids where the parents do everything for them and they're not learning things like shopping, just basic life skill stuff. They need to, start doing volunteer jobs and stuff when they're 11 to start learning some work skills, doing a task outside the family on a schedule, learning work skills. But I think we need to get some of these kids out on the ranches. That's how you're going to get them interested. And some of them are going to be very good with the animals.
And you also touched on it in your introduction. What advice would you give undergraduate students in 2024, and what are the challenges facing, I guess, the next generation of researchers coming through?
Well, I tell all students, volunteer to help professors with the research, do career relevant internships. Professors really like it when students are interested in their research. And we have nutrition experiments going on all the time here. And undergraduate students will go out and help them weigh cattle, help them collect data. I really encourage students, try lots of different stuff. Look up professors' web pages and look at their papers and approach them if you can help them with research. See, the more stuff that undergraduates do on that, that's just really, really good. And then they get interested in stuff. We have a lot of students in animal science come in wanting to be veterinarians, maybe 70%. Well, by the time they get to their third year, that drops down to 20% because they just discovered a bunch of careers that you can do, with less years in school. But the students aren't going to find that out if they don't get exposed to it. And we need to be getting these students out on the ranches, out on the properties, doing things.
Yeah. And you may be a little biased on this next question, but what good agricultural programs are out there for students wanting to be successful in the agricultural career?
Well, we have different schools that kind of go to different things. So here at CSU, we're really big into beef. Lots of stuff on nutrition, lots of genetic stuff. In fact, some of the research here on the congestive heart failure is being done here. My students working on that. Also, there's other professor here that just collected the data from Kansas and Texas. That's pretty shockingly bad. Right around 20% in swollen hearts on fed beef. That's not good. Also, we do a lot of food safety research. Then you go somewhere else, they may have a slightly different take on things. Then another place might have a lot more emphasis on pigs, for example.
Excellent. Thanks, Temple.
I mean, if you want to get an advanced degree, what I recommend is go look at professors' papers. Pick out who you want to work with for a major professor. That's what I did on my PhD. And then I approached the major professor before I applied.
Yep. And Temple, just with your introduction, you mentioned your current research you're undertaking. I'm really interested in your grazing methods and techniques. And I guess in a world where sustainability is leading the conversations globally, quite interesting. You mentioned going back
to... Well, the thing on the grazing stuff is it's very, very local. You get in parts like in New Zealand and parts of southwest eastern United States, it's grazing year round. And in where I'm at, graze in the wintertime, very much. You have to get really good local advice. The other basic thing is it takes 3 to 5 years, if you really start a good grazing program, to start to see changes in the land. It doesn't happen right away. So I'm going to recommend that you get really good local advice, because something that works in one place may not work somewhere else. That's kind of a basic principle. But the reason why I wrote the paper is I got sick and tired of cattle just being bashed as something terrible we ought to get rid of. What do you do with all land? Australian outback. I've been there. Only thing you can do on it is graze it. You're not going to grow crops in the outback.
Yep.
And I'm talking about the interior of Australia. I had a chance to go there. Fly south out of Darwin, 2 hours on a small plane, land on a dirt strip, off the grid. You're not going to grow crops there, but you can raise sheep and cattle on that.
Absolutely, and we need to manage a natural asset. I don't think if we were grazing those areas, pests and disease would certainly be introduced back into those environments.
Well, as I flew over that land, this was probably about 7 years ago. It was before COVID. I looked over all that land as we flew over it, and I'm going, the only thing we could use this for is to raise food on it. Also on a lot of the land that we have, a really good family rancher is a good steward of the land. Who's going to take care of the land? And the other thing that, I was talking about the congestive heart failure, one of the things that's led to that is heavier at a younger age. So the industry likes to have a big fat steer. But the problem is that big fat steer has a big fat sister who's actually too large to overwinter. We get snow where we're at. Sorry about sneezing. And to keep that steer on that land, okay, and it's arid all year round, that big fat cow takes too much feed.
Yep.
If you're on sparse land, you want a more moderate sized animal. So the animal that the beef plant wants isn't necessarily the best animal for arid grazing land.
No, very good. Thanks, Temple. And with your other research you were mentioning in your introduction, do you think it comes down to complacency where we sort of allow these congestive heart problems to creep into our systems and programs?
Well, what happens on things like the lameness, I call it bad becoming normal. It slowly gets worse and people don't see it. In fact, there was studies done at dairies. And they ask a dairy producer, what percentage of your cows are lame? And 4 studies now have shown they'll underestimate by half. Then when you measure it, they're shocked. You manage what you measure. Well, now the heart failure thing has come to a head now. People are realizing it really is bad. And we got to do something about it. And this used to be only a problem at high altitudes. But now it's a problem at low altitudes. And it's slowly gotten worse. And in my paper, I wrote on it, got the whole history of it. And people are realizing now they are going to have to do something about this, and it's genetic. And one feed yard that was raising what's called beef on dairy, where you breed Angus semen to Holstein dairy cows with sexed semen, and you make steers out of all the males. One feed yard I talked to, they traced a late-stage deads where cattle would just die in the feed yard back to a single Angus bull, and they got rid of the semen. And that solved the problem. It is definitely genetic. I went and I looked up some cattle in Canada. They looked fabulous. Their feet looked really good. But we've got situations now where one of the big beef plants, they paved the entire lairage or stockyard floor with rubber mats. Very, very expensive. Now that improved the mobility, but I saw a whole row of Angus cattle in there standing on those fancy mats, and they all had crossed toes like this. That's genetic. That's not okay. I saw some bad feet standing on that very expensive rubber mats. No, we need to do something about the breeding.
Thank you very much.
If you breed cattle with good feet, you don't need rubber mats.
Yep. I've just got a question from one of the people on the webinar, Bev Dick from Changaring country. What are your thoughts on feedlot systems and grass cell grazing systems compared to free roaming grasslands for healthier and content cattle?
Well, you see, in Australia, you've got New South Wales, where it's more, that'd be more like some of our land, and then you got the outback. You see that mob grazing, the principle is crowd them in kind of tight, make them mow it. Don't think that's going to work out in the middle of the interior of Australia. Might work in New South Wales. Principle is make them mow it, take half of it, because you want the animals to not cherry pick. I want them to eat the celery along with the strawberries. You know, they've got to, and these things can be done really well. You've got to make sure you have really good low stress handling. Some people are using virtual fencing, and you do these things right, then you're not going to have stress.
Excellent. Thanks, Temple. And I'll head to another question from our webinar from Nat and Matt. Do you know of any landscape-based animal welfare guidelines, such as shade percentage, shelter, distance to water, etc.?
Let's just look at some of the outcome measures. I have another paper I did on practical applications of the 5 domains welfare framework. And let's just look at your basic things. Body condition score. You're going to do that everywhere. For cows, lameness scoring. I can look at a foot and leg conformation. Now, when it comes to heat stress, if they're at rest and breathing with the mouth open, they are too hot, period. And I mean, when I went to the outback, the Indicus type cattle seemed to be fine. They'd find a little bit of shade in the bushes. They told me they brought an Angus bull out there. This isn't very nice, but what they said to me was they brought him for terminal sire. He was terminal. He died. That's an animal that definitely was not suitable for that. But you have open mouth breathing at rest. The cattle are too hot, period. And the trend now, the OIE just came out with their new slaughter guidelines. And the tendency now is to go with outcome measures. You know, there's simple outcome measures and scoring cards, the body condition, lameness. Those are 2 big ones right there. If they're in a feed yard, 30 cattle. One thing I've noticed over the years is people are putting more cattle in the pens than they did maybe 20 years ago. And they're getting dirtier in the feed yards because they're putting more cattle in the pens. I didn't realize how overcrowded they were getting them until I started going back to some of my old pictures during COVID. And I realized they're putting a lot more cattle in the pens. You know, it's something that slowly happened. And we've got to make sure that people are able to, if it's on really sparse country, go out enough and see the cattle and make sure they're okay, make sure they have water, make sure the waters are working. You know, just working on basic stuff.
Yep. No, excellent. Thanks, Temple.
Make sure the waters aren't broken.
I've got another question around breeding, if that's okay, from Jess. How do we change the culture of the breeding industry to breed against poor welfare outcomes rather than for profit? We've seen this in the chicken industry and the pork industry to some extent. How can we address the culture as rural professionals?
Well, you see, that's what people seem to want. And when we just breed for meat traits, there seem to be 2 things that seem to be connected to this: bad feet. I talked to a veterinarian in the eastern United States. She's seeing a lot of crooked claw or corkscrew claw in red Angus, and they're breeding for get up to weaning weight, a high weaning weight quickly, so they can sell them at the auction in the fall, because they sell them as weaners, and they're getting a lot of crooked feet. Okay, when it comes to broilers, you just make the breasts bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the bird has problems. Well, one innovative thing that Costco has done, and I have to disclose that I do work as a consultant for Costco, especially in chicken. They pay me very well, and I use that to put 2 students through school. I take the money I make and I pay to put graduate students through school, and I have 3 that are professors now. So I'm real happy about that. Well, they decided, they have a guy named Luke, and he's real innovative. And he decided to take an old Hubbard male that's one of the slower growing breeds and breed it to one of the fancy big breasted female. And you end up getting the same amount of meat, but you get a really big leg and a much stronger chicken. And that's probably going to be the new rotisserie bird. And so you're still getting more meat, but you're getting a stronger animal because it's putting on the muscle on its legs. You know, the thing with the pushing the chickens, it's kind of a balancing act. You have to have extremely good management. And if you're not extremely good at managing high performance broilers, they can go bad really, really quickly with downers, lameness, and other problems. They're very, very efficient. See, the other thing that's pushing some of this stuff is people saying, well, it's more sustainable. They get more pounds of beef out of each cow. Well, that's true. But then there's a point when you overdo it, you get in trouble. Now we got to the point we've pushed some of these traits to the point we're getting congestive heart failure. Well, it's not very sustainable if an animal dies a week before slaughter. I'm talking here about fat steer in a feed yard.
Yeah.
It's not very sustainable if that happens. There's a point where you have to back off. I'm also going to be very critical of some of the pets we're breeding. Bulldogs that can't breathe, naked, weird dwarf cats with leg joints that just break. Yeah, I have problems with that. I'm going to bash pets too for some of this stuff. I feel very strongly from a welfare standpoint, we have to breed functional animals, whether it's a pet or whether it's a food animal.
No, very good point. Temple, just a follow-up question from Jess. So do you think consumers are the ones that need to be made aware of this so they can demand changes to suppliers' practices?
Well, I don't think consumers really know about the heart problem. One thing that's happened, I can remember, 20 years ago, animal rights groups would sneak into places and get really horrendous video of absolutely horrible cattle handling, knocking dairy cows over with a forklift at a slaughterhouse. Really awful videos. That's the Westland Hallmark video. You can look it up. I looked it up the other day. Hideous video. Well, people improve their handling. So it's harder to get that kind of dreadful videos now. Now the kind of problems are more, okay, lameness, I'm caused by, so a lot of it caused by breeding. The heart problems are breeding. But that doesn't seem to get on the consumer's radar quite the same way as really awful rough handling, which fortunately the industry's really cleaned that up. That's gotten a whole lot better.
Very good. Getting lots of questions around virtual fencing research. Temple, what are the benefits on the stress levels of the animals and any AI, artificial intelligence, or I guess it could be artificial insemination as well, research around this as well?
You have to take the time to train your animals. I had a chance to go out on a bunch of places with events that's part of Merck now on virtual fencing. And one of the things they really emphasize, you've got to take the time to train your animals. And you start off in a familiar pasture, and you don't do it in some little teeny weeny place, and put the virtual fence right on an existing fence that the cattle are familiar with. And then you gradually move it. You've got to take the time to train them so they understand that. Also, you want to have a system where if one does run through it, they can go back in without getting shocked. Now, where you don't want to use it, and there got to be a big controversy in New Zealand, is moving cattle, milk cows into the milking parlor and moving down very, very small alleys. Sorry about the sneezing. I've got some really bad allergies.
That's okay.
That is not where to do it. And that gets very controversial. And even with a regular electric fence, if you put them in too small a place, the cow is always watching its butt. It doesn't know whether it's going to get shocked or not. You need to use it in a big enough place so that it knows here's the beep, it can move away, not get shocked. And the other thing, it's not automatic cattle handling. There's some stuff that appeared on some websites that you can get an app on a phone and just move cattle all around with it. That's BS. I told them to take that off. Now, you might eventually get where you could do something like that, but you're going to have to do a lot of training first. It's not automatic management. Now, I am a fan of virtual fencing because it can save huge amounts of money, especially out on these big open ranges. So you get in places where you're grazing a cover crop, yeah, you can just use electric strings on that and just move it down the field, and the cattle know to move. I think there's a lot of potential for virtual fencing, but some dumb stuff was done with it down in New Zealand, trying to move dairy cows into the milking shed in a real tight, confined area, and they were getting fried, and they couldn't avoid getting fried, and that was bad, and it should not be used for that. But used properly, I think on some of this really big open land, I think it's got some really good potential. And there's a lot of different systems, and there's pros and cons to the different systems. But this principle applies to all of the systems. You've got to take the time to train the animals. It's not automatic management.
And just on the theme of stress handling, Temple, is it acceptable under any circumstances to use an electric shock to train or teach an animal to learn something new?
Well, you teach it, it learns to avoid the shock. Even if you just use electric fencing, the animals have to learn, they learn to stay away from the fence after they get shocked once or twice. Just with regular electric fencing, that happens.
Yep.
But it's something that if it's done right, it's once or twice, and then the animals learn how to avoid it. And where you get into trouble, where I've seen some really bad stuff, even with regular electric fencing. There was one study that I put in my grazing paper where they were taking 7 cattle at a time and putting them in these little tiny pens made with electric fencing, and they got really stressed. Well, nobody on a real ranch puts cattle in little bitty pens of 7. And I think what was happening is those cows were always watching their backside. You know, you put them in a bigger area, they know they can stay away from it. No, and I think that really messed up some of their data in that study. Now, then you get into the issue of electric prods. It should never be a primary driving tool. Get it out of your hands. One of the things we've done in the big slaughter plants, it's banned for unloading of trucks, banned in the yards or in the lairage. They have one electric prod at the stun box entrance or the restrainer entrance, and it's on a shelf or it leans against the wall, and it's only used if the animal refuses to go in, and then you buzz it once with it. That's preferable to tail cranking and hitting. But then you put it away. You don't keep using it. You know, and I've seen cattle where people have busted their tails, or they're taking a plastic paddle and breaking it on, hitting the cattle with it. In fact, I have a video that's called Proper Use of Livestock Driving Tools. And you get an empty cardboard box and you tape it up and you whack it with a paddle. And if it starts to break, start to break the box, tapping an animal's become beating an animal. Because I really like very, very clear guidance. I also have lots of free information on my website. It's just grandin.com. Lots of free information.
No, thank you very much. I've got another question here from Anthony Houston. Is there any work being done in the US in reducing enteric methane from livestock?
Doing what with livestock?
Reducing enteric methane from livestock.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Methane. Yeah. Kim Stackhouse, one of my colleagues, is doing some fabulous research right now on the biome, the microbiome in the rumen. And it's not published yet, so they kind of want me to be cautious how I talk about this. But it's looking very exciting that the microbiome is related to the amount of methane that comes out, and a big difference. We'll leave it at that since she's asked me not to do all the details. It's not published yet. But this is something where very interesting. One of the things that's shown up, cattle from different ranches in the same pen, different amounts of methane coming out of them. There's some very exciting research on that, and it's being done at my university.
No, thanks, Temple. We look forward to that research getting published.
Yeah. They're trying to really figure it out. Because what they found is that some cattle put out way more methane than others. And they now know that it has something to do with the microbiome, but they don't know what yet.
Very interesting. Now I'd like to introduce back Brett, who's going to take us through some more questions from the attendees. Thanks, Brett. Just on mute there, Brett.
Thank you, Nigel. That's a lot better. Someone's got to bugger up the the audio on this webinar. Yes, so I've got a number of questions that came through before the webinar started, Temple. So I'll just run through some of those. Right. We had a lot of people who expressed their thanks and admiration for your work in our questions received. So you're getting a lot of well wishes and a lot of thanks in our comments here today. The first question I have for you is, what do you feel are the most effective ways to communicate with farmers and create change to improve stock handling on farms?
Well, what I found with this, it gets back to management. I don't care what's on a farm or a meat plant, doesn't matter. The owner has to get behind doing good stock handling. You know, the management has to decide this is what we're going to do. And if management's not totally behind it, it's going to be very difficult to get good stock handling. And in fact, with the stuff I did with the meat plants, we had 74 McDonald's suppliers, and they had to fire 3 plant managers. That was in the corporate plants. So that was easy to get rid of them. Managerectomy, got a different manager, and things turned around. You've got to get management people behind doing good stockmanship. And good stockmanship pays on things like conception rates on AI, on piglets born, on just weight gain, milk production in dairy cows. Stockmanship matters. And there's been some very good research that's been done in Australia by Paul Hemsworth. He's done a lot of good research on that. But I find that people want the thing. They'll buy the magic new corral, the new computer, the new drug, or some other thing. They want the thing more than they want the management. The other thing on new technologies, what I have found is little guys innovate. There's some very good stuff going on with pasture rotation. We have a newspaper at home called the Stockman Grass Farmer, which has great innovative stuff about grazing and has a terrible online presence. It's worth subscribing to the little newspaper version. It's called the Stockman Grass Farmer out of Ridgeland, Mississippi. It's probably not going to do you much good out in the arid country, but in New South Wales and some of those places, you've got innovative people doing some really good things. Little people innovate. Another thing I've found on something brand new, like the center tractor strainer, you have to find the right early adopter to put a new piece of equipment out there. You want an early adopter that wants to make your thing work. And I have a paper on transferring technology. And you have the right early adopter, you can make new things work. And you have the wrong early adopter, doesn't want to make it work. Your project's likely to fail. But we need to take innovative stuff that people are doing and write about it. One thing that made me influential in cattle handling, I wrote about it. I wrote about it in the academic press. I wrote about it in the trade press. I gave a lot of talks on it. You know, that's how you get it out there.
Okay.
And if you have some let's say there's a property that's doing some really great stuff on the pastures, this is where you need to get together with your university and get papers out on it. It's one of the things that needs to get done.
Okay, I've got another question here. It says, thinking about animal welfare and working towards getting the best outcomes, what would your advice be to a farmer who is about to send their stock off to the abattoir?
Well, I'd like to have stock that know how to handle with a person on the ground. Okay, let's say you always handled your stock on a horse. The cattle differentiate between a man on a horse and a man on the ground or a lady on the ground. Person on a horse looks totally different than the person on the ground. So if they end up at the abattoir and meet their first person on ground, their flight zone is going to be 4 times bigger. And that can get very dangerous in the abattoir pens. In fact, we had a hideous accident where a 50-year-old woman had her head stomped on by cattle. And I'm pretty sure they were cattle that had never seen a person on foot before. So get your animals used to going in and out of a pen with somebody on foot before you send them to the abattoir. Because some of the most dangerous cattle to handle are ones that meet their first person on foot at an abattoir. And I've seen situations where the handling with the horses was excellent. Beautiful handling with horses. Absolutely beautiful. And they get to the abattoir, and that feed yard was named worst cattle because they'd never seen a man on foot until they got to the abattoir. And the flight zone can get 4 times bigger. And in small pens, that gets really dangerous. They'll go into a pen and just rebound back out. That's what happened to the lady. Got her head stepped on.
Mm-hmm. So another question, education one. What advice would you give agricultural science teachers?
The ag science teachers?
Yep.
Well, you need to be keeping those programs. We have a very excellent program called Future Farmers for America. It also teaches students public speaking. We need to keep these programs in the schools. Kids need to get exposed to agriculture. You don't expose kids to stuff, how can they get interested in it? Or if they're not exposed to it, then they get really unrealistic stuff on policy. Let me tell you some stuff on policy, on sustainability. That was a gigantic mess. I can't believe somebody did this for 5 years. The investors were sold on getting wood scraps from sawmills to pelletize and ship from the US to England to fuel a power plant. Only problem is they ran out of leftovers, so they started cutting trees down in the southeastern United States, chop them all up, put them on a boat, burn them in a power plant in the UK. That went on for 5 years. That's totally ridiculous. Now, something with biofuels that would be sustainable would be, okay, pig farm, for example, get the methane off the lagoons and run some vehicles off of it. That's sustainable. Or the abattoir, Cargill does this. They put a big membrane over the lagoons, pull the methane off, and run their boilers on it. That is completely sustainable. Now, another debacle is the aviation fuel. Yeah, the chemists can do wonderful things. They can make airplane fuel out of corn, out of garbage, out of pig fat, out of wood, all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. We got one problem. You couldn't grow enough corn to fuel the airplanes. And then Virgin Atlantic did the pigs can fly stunt from Heathrow to Kennedy. Well, I looked up how many pigs it took for that one flight. You couldn't possibly have enough pigs for a tenth of the flights. There's not enough of the feedstock material. That was another expensive mess, which major airlines spent millions and millions of dollars on that. And yeah, it works. The planes will fly on it. But there's no way you could have it grow enough grain to feed all those airplanes. We're putting 40% of our grain right now into ethanol. And maybe 7% of our gas right now. That's why you need the visual thinker to go, which magic boxes should the chemists do? Yeah, we could do a few flights on it, but maybe 5%. You know, when I looked up the number of pigs, I about fell off the chair. I was right at this computer when I looked it up. Oh yeah, it made the worldwide news. Let me tell you, this guy, the publicity. Branson, he looks like a mad scientist. His hair was out straight like this. I don't know if you can see the video or not. You know, like the Back to the Future scientist. And then he's got the two wands. And he did this at the Heathrow Airport because it's a different kind of wand than what Kennedy Airport's got. He's there with the two wands, marshaling this plane out. Mad scientist, pigs can fly. Only problem is it takes too many pigs.
Okay, thank you.
No, that was something that sounded just great. No, planes are going to be flying on oil. But on the other hand, I don't want to just say all biofuel things are wrong, because there are a lot of things you do with biofuel locally that make total sense, like an abattoir putting a membrane over the lagoons and running boilers on, and some of the power requirements off of that methane. That makes sense. Yeah, there's Cargill plants that are doing that right now. In fact, I Google Earth one of them just the other day. Noticed they'd moved some of the stuff around. I wanted to show that to somebody. I said, now this is what this looks like. It looks kind of quilted. Well, that one's active. It's collecting methane.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more stock handling questions now.
Okay.
How do those of us who believe in humane handling convince some stockmen who persist with fair and heavy handling, especially when we are not in positions on farm to drive changes in approach? Well,
one thing we learned in our meat packing plant stuff, and this is not very nice, we had to fire some people. I know that's not nice. And basically, these heavy-handed people that every time your back is turned, the electric prods out, or just screaming at them and hitting them, about 10% of the people had to go. And I know that's not very nice. And in each big plant, that was one person. There's some people that like to be mean to animals. And they shouldn't be handling animals. And I know that's not very nice. But there's some neurodiverse people that might be absolutely wonderful handling animals, especially some of the visual thinkers that they're terrible at math. They can be some of your best stock people. I've seen them. And you replace them with somebody who's going to be a decent stock person. Now, the thing that's difficult is on a small property, that bad stock person may be the owner. And where I've been still seeing some bad handling, I talked to a student last year that had done an internship out at a ranch. Right in the middle of really good cattle country. They've done lots of low-stress handling workshops around there, and they were running calves to exhaustion. And she picked up a poor calf that was like going to fall from exhaustion, put it across her saddle, and she got chewed out for doing that. And that was the owner of the ranch. There's still some of that around. That was last year. That's not 20 years ago, and that was a student that I talked to her. And yeah, she quit. She had nothing to do with it. And see, the big places, we just got rid of them. The corporate plants, we just got rid of them. But it's hard if it's a family that's doing that. The other thing is, do not understaff and overwork. If you understaff and overwork, you're going to get rough handling. People just get too tired. Well, this is some stuff I've learned, and management's got to get behind it. They're serious about it. Now, there's some great handling, like our Greeley plant. Oh, I can't believe I've got our day shift is doing. You can Google Earth their yard. They got a little tiny, not very nice yard. Let me tell you, they know how to handle cattle in that yard.
Yep. Okay, great.
It's because they've totally gotten behind it.
Yep. We've got another one here about
Okay.
what's your advice for working with cows, that could be dairy or beef, who don't have a flight zone?
Well, those you bribe with grain. And I think one of the mistakes the dairy industry made. Now, the robots, of course, they now feed the cattle in the robots. When I first started in the 70s and all through the 80s, cattle were fed grain in the milking shed. Oh, and they had things like automatic feed covers and things like that to get them out of there. Well, then we stopped feeding grain in the milking shed. I think that was a mistake. Because the robots, they all feed grain in the robots. No, you have a super tame animal, you've got a rewarder for going in to squeeze you. We have, I call them Terry's station pets. They're fistulated steers, big old tame fistulated steers. All they want to do is have students pet them. And yeah, you get them in the squeeze chute. You take yummy grain that we get from the local feed yard. It's called the Cooner yard. And then you shake Cooner flakes in front of them, and they go right in the squeeze chute, and they stand and let you put the head gate on them. That's how you handle really tame cattle. Now, you can get them so tame that that can be a problem at the abattoir. You see, you can also, but the dairy cows, no, I think stopping feeding them in the parlor was a mistake. I'm old enough to remember 15 years of doing that. I think they're starting to realize it might be a mistake.
Yeah, we've got under 7 minutes left, so we'll just try and get a few more questions in.
Okay.
We've got one from online in our Q&A from Ellie. The question is, what is the biggest challenge for farmers as community leaders in climate action, do you think?
Well, one big problem we have is a lot of farmers are retiring out, and the kids are not wanting to take over the farm. This is something I'm seeing in many places as I travel around. Or they sell out and they put solar panels on it and they install them too close together and too low, and then you can't graze sheep under them. I think that's awful. Put solar panels on that land. Let's install them far enough apart and high enough up, so you graze sheep on them without the sheep rubbing on them and busting them. But the thing that's a real worry is the average age of the farm, and we need to get young people interested in farming. And I think a lot of stuff, it's going to start with kids younger than high school. I talked to the biggest construction company in the world just the other day. They build this big, power plants and stuff like this, and they're very concerned that some of their great shop people are retiring out. I can tell you where they're at. They're playing video games in the basement when they ought to be farming and ought to be building things. We got to expose elementary school kids to things like farming, shop classes, building stuff is fun, raising animals is fun. We got to work on getting them young. No, I'm very concerned. In Europe, they've kept a lot of the stuff. Like if I want to buy a poultry plant in the U.S. right now, I got to buy it from Holland. Not the building, but all the stuff that goes in it. No, but we need to be, kids have to get exposed to stuff. We've got kids growing up today. I have kids in my class, never used a tape measure, never built anything, growing up totally away from all practical things. No, we need to be getting the kids out there and showing them that, we have some people kind of homestead movement thing where some people are getting back on the farm, but it's a real worry.
Okay, I've got an international type question now. What differences do you see, and similarities for that matter, in beef production between the countries you've worked in, particularly in reference to lower impact meat, land clearing, use of feedlots, supplements, that sort of thing?
Well, there's a lot of similarities in the U.S. and Australia, and then you go over to Europe. Everything's much more intensive. A lot of the cattle are inside barns. And some of the conditions in those barns are not good, and they're coming out all filthy, dirty. Basic welfare things, body condition, lameness, filthiness. And if they're on concrete, they better not be lame and have swollen leg joints. That's stuff I can measure, outcome measures. Australia and the US and Canada are much more similar than maybe Germany and Italy, where a lot of the cattle are kept in barns.
Okay, just a question here. What gives you hope as you survey climate impacts on agriculture and our farming community?
Well, we've got to, we got to get young people out doing things. I figured out I'm 77 years old right now, and I just was with Ohio State University yesterday, talked to about 20 students, some of them undergraduate, some of them in graduate school. So you're going to be tomorrow's leaders. And first of all, you got to get out and see what's going on. And now we went to a very nice pork plant up in Canada, and I can tell you one thing I liked. They had some decent pigs that could walk. They had cleaned up some of the bad genetics. They were making sure that people were walking amongst the pigs and getting them used to handling. There were some people at that plant doing some stuff right. I was pleased. Now that's pigs, but I mean a lot of these things. And they have like 100 farm families that raise the pigs, and it's a co-op with about 100 farm families. And one thing I want to warn you on co-ops: a co-op with 100 farm families works better than a co-op with 3 or 4 families. 3 or 4 families fight. I've been in this industry. Worked with co-ops for 40 years. 3 or 4 people owning a plant fight, and the plant ends up getting lost and sold. Plants are still around. Other people own them now. But this thing has 100 families, so that works a lot better. Then you don't get 1 or 2 that sort of sell the others out. I've seen that happen.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. This might be our final question.
And I can go over a little bit if you want.
Yeah, well, we try and keep to the hour, but we'll see how we go on this question. We might squeeze another one in after this. How do you see the future of farming in terms of balancing food security, climate action, and animal welfare?
Well, we have to look at a balance of things, because there's a problem with the lameness and the congestive heart failure. That's something bad becoming normal. And in some places, it got pretty bad before something was done about it. That's certainly not good for animal welfare. We have to look at what's optimum. I mean, you breed a dairy cow to the point where she can't hardly get her bread. You got to back off on some of this genetic stuff. I like to look at genetic selection sort of like a national budget. If I put it all into the economy, meat, milk, or eggs, I shortchange the infrastructure, the heart, the reproduction, the feet and legs. But am I also shortchanging my military, my immune system? Everything takes energy. We have to start looking at what is optimal. What is optimal? That's the thing we need to be looking at. And people that are going to be involved in policy, I don't care what country you're in, you got to get your butt out of the office, get out in the field. I call it dragging the suits out of the office, and find out what's actually going on, so we don't make policy that's bad.
Okay, great. Make this the final one then, please, Temple. This one's from Georgie off the Q&A. What's your key wisdom for enabling neurodivergent people to thrive in their careers?
Find something you're really good at. One of the things I did is I learned to sell my work rather than selling myself. I would show off my drawings. I don't know if you can see this or not, but that's one of my drawings right there in the book. Get good at something and sell your work. Get really good at cattle handling. People are going to hire you. Get really good at something that's a skill other people want. The other thing I strongly recommend young neurodiverse people, you got to learn how to work. Let's get jobs when you're still in high school. When you're in college, get involved with all kinds of internships, all kinds of opportunities to get out and see stuff and do stuff and make yourself really good, because we need the neurodiverse skills. We need them. And I'm a non-mathematician, but something like that airplane fuel debacle, I think that is a bit of a debacle. I wouldn't have made that mistake. You can't get enough grain to feed those airplanes. That's impossible. But a lot of money got spent on that. That wasn't very good policy. But on the other hand, local methane capture, local biofuel can do some really good sustainable things. So I'm not anti-biofuel. If you're fueling your vehicles off your lagoons, that's really good local stuff. I think a lot of stuff in the future is going to be local. And the other thing is, you do something really cool, really wonderful, write about it. Please write about it. And write about it in some of the in the academic press where there's a permanent record. I think that's important. Get out and do talks on it, and stay out of partisan politics. You want to keep your whole audience.
Okay, great. Well, that's the end of our questions, I think, Temple. But thank you so much, Dr. Temple Grandin, for your wonderful talk and answering lots of questions. We could easily have listened to you for another hour and been captivated with your stories and passions for what you do. As you've said, if you'd like more information, go to your website, grandin.com.
Yeah, just grandin.com, and I've got my books are on there, my livestock books are on there. Now, if you're interested in autism and neurodiverse, I've got templegrandin.com is my autism site. Grandin.com is my livestock site. Now, the new livestock handling and transport I don't have up on the websites yet. Amazon has got it, but when I wrote into Amazon, it gave me the older editions. You probably want to order it right from Cabby, but that's out now. It just came out last week, the new 6th edition of Livestock Handling and Transport.
Right. Thank you for that. And there's also, of course, your movie, great story about your life. Not many people actually get the opportunity to have a movie made about them within their lifetime.
Yeah, you can get that. It's called Temple Grandin, and HBO has got it. Some of the different streaming, Amazon Prime, I'm pretty sure has got it. And the thing that's really accurate in that movie is the visual thinking. It shows visual thinking. I'm an extreme visual thinker. All my memories are pictures, and it shows that really accurately. The projects are accurate. They did a great job on showing all of my project stuff. The other thing is that's really good. It shows a scene in there where I go up to the editor of our State Farm magazine when I was in my 20s, when I was a student still. And I got his card and I started writing for that magazine. That really helped my career. That's seeing a door to opportunity. And I became livestock editor for that magazine. That really helped my early career. Yeah, take advantage of those sort of things. Do those sort of things.
Okay, great. Thank you, Temple. I've got a few thank yous now just to finish up, but we really appreciate you making the time today. And you're definitely a legend, and we thank you very much for your attendance. I'll just do the other thank yous. From behind the scenes, we've got FCA staff members, Paul Stark, Walter Batt, Peter Holding and Gideon Daly, who've been organising this webinar with JC Clark from Ability Agriculture. An extra thanks to Walter Batt, who had the original idea to invite Dr. Grandin to speak at this webinar. Thanks, Nigel, for doing the interview, and Ability Agriculture for being partners with FCA on this webinar. Well done, Peter, on managing the hundreds of questions we've received. Thanks for working hard there in the background. A final thanks to the 600 plus people who've been our audience today. You've asked some great questions and hopefully you've learned a lot. There will be a follow-up email with a link to the recorded copy of the webinar. We've had that question a fair bit coming through today. This is our last FCA webinar for 2024, but we look forward to seeing you all at our 2025 series. To finish, I wish to use a typically grounded comment from Dr. Temple Grandin. That is the end of the Yakety Yak. We wish you all a peaceful and joyous Christmas. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Temple. Well done.
You know, it was great to be here, and we've got to get young people. You know, that's why I'm spending a lot of time now just talking to young people.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Fantastic.
For the future.